I said, but there's something in my vision. There's some songs from the 80s and 90s that are great songs. And I said, let me try and swing those. It would be fresh. And I think that we shouldn't put ourselves in the parameter of thinking in niches.
Paul Anka was not just another singer on the radio. He was a force of nature in the late 1950s, a teenager who dared to dream bigger than his small-town roots. By the time most kids were figuring out high school dances, Paul was already writing songs that would outlast decades. But his journey wasn't just about sudden fame. It was about heritage, determination, and an unwavering belief that he could break through. To understand the man the world now remembers at 84, we have to trace back to where it all began, before the spotlight, before the fame, in Ottawa. Paul Anka entered the world on July 30th, 1941, in Ottawa, Canada, the firstborn in a family deeply rooted in Lebanese culture. His father, Andy, ran a restaurant that wasn't simply a place to eat. It was a gathering spot, alive with music, chatter, and community energy. His mother, Camelia, devoted herself to the home, raising Paul and his younger siblings with love, tradition, and a strong sense of identity. Being the eldest, Paul carried a natural responsibility. But beyond chores and schoolwork, something greater was brewing inside him, a pull toward music that seemed to come from everywhere around him. The family's church, St. Elijah's, became Paul's earliest stage. At just 11, he joined the choir, his small voice gradually learning to carry confidence. The melodies of hymns instilled not only discipline, but also the understanding that music was about connection. Performing there gave him the first taste of attention, and he craved more. Beyond the church, his father's restaurant brought performers, travelers, and entertainers through its doors. Paul sat quietly, soaking it all in. He didn't just enjoy the sounds. He studied them, the way a song could hush a room or spark laughter in an instant. Curiosity pushed him further. Without formal training, Paul taught himself piano and guitar. Every chord, every note came through relentless practice and sharp observation. He idolized Frank Sinatra, Nat King Cole, and Patti Page, marveling at how they could make music feel intimate, yet universal. It didn't take long before Paul realized this wasn't a hobby, it was a calling. By his early teens, he was writing songs, jotting down feelings that seemed far beyond his years. Those early efforts might have been raw, but they revealed a boy who already knew his destiny. He was going to make music his life. By 14, Paul's ambition had grown too large for Ottawa. He begged his parents to let him travel to Los Angeles, where his uncle Maurice was involved in the entertainment industry. Reluctantly, they agreed, unaware that this trip would change everything. For most teenagers, Los Angeles meant bright lights and excitement. For Paul, it meant strategy. He wasn't there to play. He was there to push his way into the business, armed with raw talent and unshakable determination. He spent his days visiting radio stations, shadowing studio sessions, and making introductions wherever possible. He didn't just smile politely. He insisted on being heard. His persistence impressed Don Costa, a producer and arranger with ABC Paramount Records. Costa listened carefully and saw more than just a teenager. He heard potential, a voice with warmth and phrasing far beyond his years, and even more importantly, songwriting instincts that couldn't be taught. Paul was signed, and in 1956 his first single was released. The track went nowhere, barely making a ripple on the charts. For most teenagers, that would have been discouraging enough to quit. But Paul had no intention of stopping. He was driven not only by talent, but also by an internal conviction that success was just around the corner. Then, in 1957, lightning struck. Paul wrote Diana, inspired by a crush on a slightly older girl from his hometown. It was a simple song, heartfelt, youthful, and pure, but it captured the universal emotions of teenage longing. Released worldwide, Diana exploded, selling over 10 million copies and topping the Billboard charts. Practically overnight, Paul Anka became a household name. At just 16 years old, he was thrust into a life most could only dream of. Fame didn't come from luck. It came from preparation meeting opportunities. He was suddenly traveling internationally, performing to screaming fans, and appearing on television. Ottawa's boy had become a global star. Yet even in those first heady months, Paul knew this was only the beginning. His vision wasn't just about one hit. He wanted to build something that would last. With the world watching, Paul delivered again. Songs like "You Are My Destiny," "Put Your Head on My Shoulder," and "Lonely Boy" followed quickly, each one resonating with teenagers navigating the highs and lows of young love. His lyrics spoke directly to their experiences: first crushes, heartbreak, the endless dreaming of youth. What set him apart wasn't just the words, but how his smooth, confident delivery made the songs feel personal. Fans didn't just listen, they felt understood. His records were played at school dances, scribbled in notebooks, and sung in bedrooms across continents. Paul wasn't just a singer anymore. He had become the voice of a generation. And while his peers were cramming for exams, he was on stages around the world, learning how to hold an audience in the palm of his hand. Balancing school and stardom was nearly impossible, but Paul pressed on, even forming a vocal group with friends to sharpen his stagecraft. The Bobby Soxers may have been local, but they gave him the practice that made performing in front of thousands feel natural. By the end of the 1950s, Paul Anka was not just a teen idol, he was an international phenomenon, his songs deeply embedded in popular culture. What began in the choir of a small church and the back room of a restaurant had transformed into a career that few could have imagined. For Paul, the ride had only just begun, and he was determined to take it further than anyone thought possible. Paul Anka's reputation quickly grew beyond the face of a teen idol. While crowds screamed his name, what truly distinguished him was not only the songs he sang, but the songs he wrote. His pen became just as powerful as his voice. In 1959, he handed Buddy Holly what would be one of his last recordings, "It Doesn't Matter Anymore." Its bittersweet lyrics about lost love carried a haunting weight when Holly tragically died in a plane crash just weeks later. Instead of cashing in, Paul donated every royalty from the song to Holly's widow, earning respect in an industry often dominated by ego. He didn't stop there. His writing found homes with other performers, shaping careers far outside his own. Tom Jones's smash hit "She's a Lady" in 1971 was Anka's work, perfectly tailored to Jones's booming voice and brash charisma. The ability to write in multiple styles proved Paul wasn't confined to one lane. He could adapt, transform, and elevate other stars with his words. And then came television. Millions tuned into The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson for decades, humming along unknowingly to Paul's composition, Johnny's Theme. This tune ran for 30 years, embedding itself into American culture so deeply that even viewers who never owned an Anka record still heard him nightly. While many of his peers from the 50s faded into nostalgia acts, Paul evolved. He was not only a performer, but also a craftsman, someone the industry leaned on for timeless songs. Yet behind this success, a deeper, more personal connection was forming that would eventually define his career. He had long admired Frank Sinatra, the man he saw as the epitome of class and artistry. Crossing paths with him would change not just Paul's life, but also the soundtrack of American music. What began as admiration would grow into mentorship, friendship, and one of the most iconic collaborations in history. Meeting Sinatra was not like meeting another star. For Paul, it was as if a distant dream had suddenly become tangible. He had idolized Sinatra's voice, swagger, and stage presence since boyhood, and now he was sitting across from him, speaking not as a fan, but as a fellow artist. Sinatra, famously selective about the company he kept, found something genuine in Paul. The young songwriter carried himself with respect and seriousness, and before long, Paul was welcomed into Sinatra's tightly knit circle. Their bond went far deeper than industry politeness. Sinatra opened doors, invited him to dinners, and gave him a seat at the table where legends gathered. Yet Paul didn't just linger in the background. He brought something to offer. In 1968, while in France, he stumbled upon a song titled Comme d'habitude. The melody struck him, but the lyrics felt flat. Back in his hotel room, he rewrote the words entirely, tailoring them to reflect Sinatra's life, the pride, the regrets, the stubborn independence. What emerged was My Way. When Sinatra recorded it in 1969, it became more than a hit. It became his anthem, the song that defined his career and was played at his farewell, even his funeral. For Paul, it was validation of his deepest talents. He wasn't merely writing for charts, he was capturing souls. The two men remained close for decades, sharing meals, exchanging wisdom, and standing by each other during highs and lows. Paul often credited Sinatra with teaching him how to navigate fame and manhood under pressure. Their friendship endured until Sinatra's passing in 1998, leaving Paul with memories of loyalty and lessons he would carry forever. Even today, when Anka performs My Way, he doesn't just sing it as a songwriter. He tells the story of how it came to be, a reminder of the extraordinary bond that had shaped him. The music world of the 1960s and 70s was a battlefield of change. Rock grew heavier, the British invasion dominated, and many of yesterday's idols vanished from the spotlight. Paul Anka could easily have been among them. Instead, he chose adaptation over retreat. While others tried to imitate new trends, Paul leaned into what made him unique: songwriting. If the stage wouldn't always hold him, the studio still would. He wrote tirelessly for others, embedding his fingerprints across styles and generations. Yet he didn't abandon performance entirely. His smooth voice and emotive phrasing found a natural place in adult contemporary music, reaching audiences who had grown up with him and now wanted songs that spoke to their more mature lives. At the same time, Las Vegas became his new stage. Casinos and theaters welcomed entertainers with polish, and Paul fit seamlessly into that world. Night after night, he delivered shows filled with nostalgia, storytelling, and timeless hits, cultivating an intimacy that stadium tours could not. Vegas allowed him not only to survive, but to thrive as trends shifted elsewhere. He managed to bridge eras, carrying forward fans from the 50s while collecting new ones along the way. What separated him from his peers was not just talent, but resilience. He refused to be defined by a single decade. For Paul, longevity meant evolving without abandoning identity, and that skill kept him in the business when many of his contemporaries had been reduced to trivia. The ability to shift focus, to embrace songwriting when the charts no longer favored his voice, and to reinvent himself in live performance proved his versatility. By the end of the 70s, Paul had outlasted the term teen idol and had established himself as something greater, a craftsman of music who belonged to no single era, but whose influence stretched across them. Behind the polished performances and international acclaim, Paul's personal life was far more complicated. Fame often looks glamorous from the outside, but for Paul, the constant touring and the demands of stardom created cracks in the foundation of his relationships. In 1963, he married Anka Zogheb, a striking model of Lebanese and European descent. Together, they built a family of 5 daughters, and for a time, the marriage seemed steady. Yet the pressure of Paul's relentless schedule, combined with the distance of life on the road, eventually took its toll. After 37 years, they quietly divorced in 2000, closing a chapter defined by both love and sacrifice. His second marriage, however, proved far more turbulent. In 2008, Paul wed Swedish model and personal trainer Anna Aberg. Their union was brief and bitter, ending just 2 years later in 2010. The split escalated into a highly public custody battle over their son, Ethan. Unlike the amicable end to his first marriage, this fight was public, painful, and prolonged. After years of legal struggles, Paul eventually won sole custody in 2017, an outcome he described as one of his proudest victories. Though difficult, it revealed how fiercely he valued his role as a father. In the years following those battles, Paul's career took on a quieter rhythm, yet he continued to surprise audiences with flashes of creativity. The 2000s saw him reinvent himself with the bold album Rock Swings, where he reimagined grunge and rock classics through lush big band arrangements. Hearing Paul Anka croon "Smells Like Teen Spirit" or "Wonderwall" might have sounded absurd on paper, but in practice it showcased his ability to adapt, to take risks, and to breathe new life into unlikely material. Critics praised the experiment, noting how effortlessly he blended genres while retaining his own style. The album didn't storm the charts, but it kept Paul relevant, reminding listeners that he was never content to rest on nostalgia alone. Alongside this, his Las Vegas residencies cemented him as a staple of live entertainment. Fans who had grown up with his music flocked to see him, while younger audiences discovered a living legend performing with the same polish as ever. These performances were more than concerts. They were storytelling sessions, where Paul wove decades of memories into song. Though he was no longer a fixture on radio or television, he proved that artistry was not bound by age. He could still command a stage, surprise critics, and satisfy longtime admirers. Now in his 80s, Paul Anka lives a life far quieter than the roaring decades of fame that once defined him. He rarely grants interviews and spends most of his days outside the public eye. Where once there were stadiums of fans, now there is calm. A home shared with his son Ethan, who has become the center of his world. Friends describe him as reflective, sometimes melancholic, burdened by the isolation that comes when the industry moves on and old connections fade. He has spoken candidly about loneliness, about how the very success that brought him adoration also made lasting intimacy difficult. Though his health remains relatively strong, time has slowed him, and he admits the world of music often feels unrecognizable now. Younger generations rarely know his name. Award shows pass without mention, and tributes to his era seldom feature him. Yet for those who remember, Paul Anka remains unforgettable, a man whose songs captured the innocence of youth, the pride of independence, and the bittersweet truth of life lived on one's own terms. Today, he carries that legacy with quiet dignity, finding purpose not in applause, but in fatherhood. For Paul, that may be the most meaningful encore of all. At 84, Paul Anka's spotlight has dimmed, yet his songs endure. Fame faded, but his legacy remains, a reminder of glory, heartbreak, and music that still whispers across generations.